I'm excited. Honestly, I'm excited. I got Bryan Caplan on the pod. Now, these days, immigrants are blamed for everything. But like Bryan says, are we really blaming immigrants for everything, or should we be blaming the real problem? Like, is the problem the immigrant or the problem that we don't have enough houses? Let's get into it, because this was fun. Really, this was a fun one. Enjoy. I'm excited for many reasons for doing this with you, because I read your book, The Open Borders, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's the kind of book you read, and I'm an immigrant myself, but...
Mm-hmm. From where to where?
I moved from Nigeria to Canada. So Lagos, I was Lagos, Nigeria. I moved to Canada like 4 years ago. And with everything that's going on right now, I think what I want to ask, because I want to learn, is, first one is, I feel like the thesis of the book is around something that is unsaid with all the immigrant arguments, is immigration doesn't make us poorer, because it feels like that is what a lot of people, they probably don't say it out sometimes, but that's at the core. Is, immigration makes us a poorer country because things are not enough. And I feel like your book destroys that thesis. And I want to just kind of speak to you, like, how did you come to that conclusion, or where, how have you approached it to get to that point?
Honestly, it's mostly reading. I'm not doing a lot of field work, although I can talk to you about the international observations I've had that have had the most influence on me. But really, a lot of it started with, in the early 2000s, I found that there were some immigration economists that were trying to measure, first of all, how much of a gain does an immigrant get when he moves, especially from the third world to the first world? And then secondly, if we were to go and scale this up and imagine just having a world where anyone could move anywhere, how large would the gains of that be? The answer to the first question is the gains are enormous. So if you're going from Nigeria to Canada, I think you have seen those enormous gains. But then the second result of what if anyone could go anywhere, that's where we get results that are essentially the largest that any economist has ever found in terms of how can we enrich humanity. Because you just have to imagine an enormous number of people gaining an enormous amount, and then that production that they are adding to the world becoming part of the stockpile of what's available at the store is the best way of thinking about it.
Yeah. But, and then I think there's the counter argument. It's not really a counter argument that people go but then open borders is lawlessness. And that, it's, what are your thoughts on that? Because I feel like that's always where people go to. It's like, oh yeah, but when you just keep the borders open, then you let every kind of person in, or like immigrants commit the most crimes. I did see something you shared a couple of days ago about the fact that data shows that immigrants don't commit that much crimes as they say. And I was like, yeah, I should read that.
Right. First of all, I would say that it's totally possible and historically was true that you can have open borders and yet still there's a checkpoint and they look at your papers and see if you are wanted for murder. And if you're wanted for murder, instead of letting you into the country, they put you in jail, right? So that's fully consistent. Although I would also say, look, we are very familiar with having open borders inside of countries. So between provinces of Canada, between states in the United States, between countries in the EU. And it is generally the case that you don't have to do any paper check at all. Does this mean that you're vulnerable if a serial killer wants to move from Alberta to Manitoba? Yeah, you are actually. But you get something wonderful by allowing that risk, which is that you do not inconvenience the 99.99999% of people who are not serial killers who just want to go and drive and see a friend or do a job or go to a store. This is the kind of thing that almost no one in politics wants to talk about, just the extreme inconvenience of even the mildest checks. So while it is ultimately not that big of a deal if you do want to have these border checks, and if someone says, I would never consider otherwise, or fine. But still, if you were to say, what is the argument just to go and let people move freely? It's the extreme inconvenience of checking papers. If you remember what it was like during COVID when you got to go and show your papers to do a basic thing, was it a good thing that we got rid of that? I say, yeah, it was a very good thing we got rid of that. Even if you were getting some marginal extra protection, it just wasn't worth it.
Yeah, I think that, it's almost like you saying, you want to kill a fly and then you go take like a really big axe, like, I'm going to kill the fly with the axe. And then when you're done, the whole room is a mess.
Yes.
Sorry, that was a really extreme analogy.
I'll leave it to the listener's imagination as the nature of the mess.
I think, but the thing, I think for me, Canada is an interesting country because we say in Canada that we're an immigration success story, but then the past year has been it's been funny. It's just a ton of arguments about immigrants are blamed for everything. Oh, the housing is bad. Oh, the immigrants are the problem. The hospitals are full. Oh, there are no immigrants. And there are a ton of things you describe in Open Borders in terms of like how we should think of immigration. And I'm just like, if you think about where the world is right now, or you think about the thesis you present in Open Borders, and you think about a country like Canada that is pro-immigration, but it seems like we're having a place where we're not sure about it anymore. Are there lessons that we could take from your book, from what you've seen the past couple of years in approaching the Canadian conversation?
I would start with, Canada has the kind of immigration system that even immigration skeptics generally envy. You've got this point system. There's a lot of admiration for the Canadian system, even among immigration skeptics. Like I said, such a focus on high school immigration. And then to realize that the Canadians themselves are still complaining. It's like, so could it really be that even high school immigrants are bad? It's like, no. What's really going on is that it is human nature to find scapegoats for problems, and immigrants are the easiest scapegoats that people have, especially because people tend to think of, well, let's blame this on the people that haven't come here yet. Those are the easiest people to blame. Let's say the reason that we are stopping problems before they start by not letting people who will cause problems come here. The specific complaints that you'll get about immigrants, they are, as I explained in the book, ones where if you listen, say, well, look, all right, I might be able to understand how reducing immigration would make a dent in this problem, but there are much more obvious ways of addressing the problem directly that you don't seem to want to talk about. Yeah. So I know in Canada there's a big issue. Oh, immigrants are driving up housing prices. Well, who fault that? How about you go and reduce the regulation of housing in Canada so you can build stuff? Why not that instead? It would be the same problem if Canadians were having babies. Canadians are having few kids.
Oh, yeah.
Like why? Like if the complaint is housing, build housing. If the complaint is crime, punish crime. If the complaint is abuse of the welfare state, then reduce access to the welfare state. This is common sense, and yet it is common sense that almost no one wants to listen to, because it's really more about a desire to take people that you're not very happy with and then associate some problems with them. So it's not really a problem-solving mentality. It is a blaming mentality of, I need to complain about those people. What can I say? You can see this most extremely in the U.S., where recently there was a debate about high school immigration along the lines of, look, all these Asian immigrants are taking up the top STEM positions in America. So it's like, you were complaining about the fact that they are great at math and science. That's your complaint. If you're going to complain about, or for somebody about that, then you are really just an impossible to please person. And it's not really about them. It's about you and your misanthropy.
It reminds me of something I read a couple of days ago. It was by Rory Sutherland, the Ogilvy vice president, who wrote...
dealt with, what did you say?
His name is Rory Sutherland. He works at Ogilvy, the ad agency. He talks about how politicians and business people too do that a lot, where we take complex conversations
Mm-hmm.
and compress them down into just one simple thing, because that
Mm-hmm.
way it allows us to kind of win the argument. So we don't want to have a conversation, we want to win the argument. And
Mm-hmm. Okay,
it,
makes
it just
sense.
it just feels like that's what we see with the immigration
Yes.
conversation these days. Is we're not open to having a conversation about what does immigration mean, what is bad about the current system, what is good about it, like, and how do we make it better. No, it's either it's
Mm-hmm.
good or it's bad. Like, they're just
Mm-hmm.
extremes, and I want you to stay on my side, or I'm not on your side. That sort of thing, and it's
Mm-hmm.
tiring to see. I think that's what I found refreshing about your book,
Mm-hmm.
just that ability to say, let's kind of step back and say, how do we look at this thing and make it work? Because it does work if we get it right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, honestly, I would say, of course, my book is much more extreme than almost any position you're likely to hear in a mainstream conversation. I'd say what's different between my work and the work that you're likely to read from other people is I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to argue like a lawyer. I'm not here to win a case. I'm not here to score points. I'm here just to get to the absolute literal truth of the matter as best I can. Of course, I'm only a human being, so that's hard.
Yeah.
But to avoid taking the cheap shot to saying, oh, well, you say this and yet you're an immigrant yourself. It's like, that's the kind of argument that normal people make. It works to point to someone's hypocrisy, right? Or you can say, oh, well, you're against immigration, but you hired an illegal nanny. How do you explain that? Right? And these are arguments that are intellectually worthless, and yet they work well. And really, I'm just trying to throw out all those arguments and just stick to the facts. There were a number of points in the book where my editor said, well, why are you conceding this point? It undermines the argument. Like, I'm conceding the point because the critics are correct on this point. If they're correct, then I say they're correct. That's the system. I'm not a lawyer.
I'm just curious, like, why did you, like, what led you say, look, you know what, I'm going to reprint the book again? Because I feel like, like, why now? Like, why now?
It's real simple. The original publisher let it go out of print. Right? So the original publisher, for a second, major publisher of prestige graphic novels. And I think they felt like it had sold about as many copies as it was going to sell, and they did not want to go and do another printing to keep it in print. So they then allowed the rights to revert to me. Fortunately, the Cato Institute was all too happy to pick up the slack, and that's why it is happily now back in print and probably will stay so indefinitely now. So Cato, as a nonprofit, is willing to do things that, from a purely business point of view, might not make sense, or maybe they just have a different business model where it works for them, but it does not work for a bigger publisher.
Cheers to them, because it's really good to have it back. How's the reception been so far? Like, are people, like, because I feel like immigration is a big conversation across North America right now. Like, it's a hot button topic.
Yeah, I mean, all over the world, right? I mean, do people in Nigeria argue about immigration, don't they?
Yeah, I think so. It is, yeah, because people in Nigeria are moving over. So
right, but also you're like, Nigeria's doing relatively well compared to some of your neighbors. So you're probably getting people from where?
So we probably get people from. I wouldn't call us an immigration-heavy country, to be honest.
No. It's probably not, and yet, look, that doesn't stop people from complaining. I don't know, like, are you getting people from Burkina Faso or someplace like that?
No, so you probably have people come from the countries around. So you have Togo,
yes,
Ghana, you have
right. Well, Ghana's probably doing better than Nigeria, right? So
right now, right now, Ghana. So we've now have it's going back to the other side. So
you may even just be getting your internal migration from the war-torn Muslim areas of Nigeria to the better performing Christian areas, right?
Yeah, that will happen. Yeah, that happens in Nigeria right now. Like, that has always happened, because like I grew up in the northern part of Nigeria. At some point, my Popsy was lecturing at the university. He moved to the eastern part of Nigeria. I went to school there, and then I moved to the western part of Nigeria. And so literally I've moved around the country, but it feels like, sorry, you're cold. Sorry about your cold. But it feels like the internal one doesn't get the amount of, what's it called? Friction you get with when you start moving across borders, that's for various reasons. But that's just how he feels, which is why I say for Nigeria, it's not a big conversation internally, aside from the fact that it's a conversation because of the people who are looking to move to other countries. So they get very interested in all that's
Sure.
going on
Yep.
and how does this affect me if I want to move to another country.
Yep. I mean, I have seen the data, so just intra-African migration is actually quite high. I mean, to people in the US or Canada, they think, oh, it's all Africa. What's the point? But if you're in Africa, on the other hand, look, there are better and worse places of Africa. There are like large differences. There's the places that are in the middle of a horrible civil war. There's the places where you can go and get a pretty good job. And like you can go to Namibia or to Botswana. So like all of this is on the mind of people that are there.
Yeah, fair. So there's a point you make in the tweet you sent, the news that you sent out when you announced the book, where you talk about the Gulf Monarchies. And first of is, like people will point, like, I mean, I feel like it's probably a lazy argument, but people will just say, first of all, if you say that to them, like, but those folks, the culture is different. There's worker right issues, there's social hierarchies. And so I'm just like, how do you balance those criticisms with the way the economic growth they get from immigration? Like, is there, like, what's the line there? Like for you, like, is there a line, or are we just making an argument for the sake of making an argument because you're looking for something to say about the situation?
Yeah. I mean, my quick reaction is, how do you balance 100 pounds of gold against a feather? All right. Yeah, you don't. The 100 pounds of gold wins. So I recently finally did get to go to Emirates. I'd read a lot about it. Just to back up, Emirates is the country in the world with the very highest foreign-born share, 88% foreign-born. It is not just that they're letting in petroleum engineers and doctors. They let in low-skilled workers in enormous numbers too. The population of Emirates has gone from about 280,000 at the founding of the country in 1971 to almost 10 million. Obviously, the extraction of fossil fuels is a very important part of this. And yet, there's so much more going on there, which again, I knew before, but to see that with your own eyes, it really is something where it's hard to ever think about anything else afterwards. Let me put it this way. In the very best case scenario, what Emirates could have done would be to go and just bring in the minimum foreigners to help them extract all of the fossil fuels, share that money with their citizens, and then what? What do? You make everyone in the country a millionaire, and then what? It's like, well, are you going to have millionaires hired to deliver pizzas to millionaires, or are you going to leave the country? Those are sort of the two obvious things to do. And they did the non-obvious thing, which is, why don't we go and invite the world to come and work for us here? That's what they did. And as a result, they have built a truly amazing country. The GDP of the country is multiplied over 100-fold. In the midst of this miracle, there are, as usual, a bunch of people complaining. Generally foreigners, the people that are there, they actually get to witness how awesome it is. And also, to be honest, if there were a few complainers, they would probably get deported. All right. But in any case, the complaints, so like labor rights, it's like, well, so first of all, if you actually read the law of Emirates, they have a bunch of legal protections like you would have in other countries. But the more important point is people voluntarily come there because conditions are way better in Emirates than they are in their home countries. They are not being tricked. They aren't showing up and saying, oh my God, I'm in Emirates and I don't have my legal rights. Instead, what the real story is, they're getting phone calls from friends and relatives in Emirates telling them, I can get you a job that pays 5 times what your job in Pakistan does. Right? In terms of what the legal rights are, it's like, yeah, well, they're going to be better than in Pakistan. But the more important point is people are making a choice between a much better life and a much worse life. And they obviously choose the much better life. And then some self-righteous busybodies from other countries go and try to complain about it. The main one that people talked about is having your passport confiscated. So that's illegal under current Emirati law. I did talk to people there. It is not the kind of thing that a business is going to safely get away with violating. But again, it's also one where you say, well, wait a second, what is the punishment if you cause trouble as a guest worker in Emirates? Yeah, they deport you. So then what is the big threat of holding your passport? It is not such a big threat. Right? In terms of complaints about culture, this is one where, in a sense, the critics are right, because all this immigration has dramatically transformed the culture of Emirates to the point where, according to the people that live there that I talked to, you are better off knowing only English than knowing only Arabic. English has actually become the number one language of the country. So what has happened is neither that the immigrants have changed the culture of the natives, nor that the natives have changed the culture of the immigrants, but rather everybody is assimilating to global English-speaking culture. When I was there, in terms of the government propaganda, what really struck me is a bunch of signs saying toleration and tolerance and moderation. Those are the two big slogans of the country. And walking around, it really does seem like the country's living that. It's like, well, who are they trying to scare with this tolerance and moderation propaganda? Yeah, I think it's the people that want to ruin Emirates, like your Islamists, people who want to go and turn it into Iran or Saudi, right, or Turkey. It's like, yeah, they've got an amazing system there. But yeah, unfortunately, there are some total jerks, fanatics, who are looking at it angry. And the government is there saying, yeah, we're not going to go and let some Islamist fanatics take over. No, right? We've got a great thing going here. We're not going to let you ruin the lives of 10 million people out of your own vanity. Right. I mean, walking around, it's one where definitely a lot of people say, oh, but it's a dictatorship. A lot of people think about Singapore as being a well-functioning dictatorship. I say that's very unfair, because Singapore is actually a democracy. And when people call it a dictatorship, they just mean it's a democracy that doesn't vote for what the complainers believe in. On the other hand, Emirates is a total dictatorship, of course. It's also one when you're there, you have to say, and if they had free elections, would they destroy the system? And I think there's a pretty high risk that they would. Right? You say, so you're saying that democracy is too dangerous to try in Emirates? Like, it's a very reasonable idea. Yeah, so I'm not an expert in the country, but I think it is very reasonable to be afraid that democracy would ruin things in Emirates. And in terms of what you would gain, it's very hard to see what the gains would even supposedly be. Right? To turn Emirates into Turkey, great.
I think that the thing to take away there is how we put everything together into one box and want to have the conversation or the argument. It's like, I feel like there's an immigration argument, there's a system of governance argument, there's a cultural argument, and the human. Yes, all those things affect us as people. Like the kind of governance I get, can I immigrate or not? Like, is the culture mine? But when you put them all together into one box and want to talk about it, like, it just gets all messy and stuff. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
I feel like,
I mean, that's part of the problem. I mean, I think like a much bigger problem is just that people do not like the saying actions speak louder than words, because it shows that most of the complaints are not serious complaints anyway. When someone says, oh, it's doing great harm to the culture, well, you could move to a low immigration part of your country if it really bothers you so much. Have you done that? Almost nobody does. So I say that people do not actually care that much about culture. It is the kind of thing you bring up when you want to win over a crowd with an inspiring piece of poetry, even though if you really think about it, people barely actually care. So there are things like, like violent crime. People care about that. People move to a new neighborhood to get rid of violent crime. On the other hand, it's like my neighborhood, I would say that it's majority foreign born. And this is in no way a negative feature of my community. It's a very wealthy area, and the culture by itself does not really bother anyone. Right? It's more that you bring up culture when either you might just not want to talk about what's really on your mind. It's like, well, we have bad crime here. It's like, all right, well, why say culture when you mean crime? Right. And yes, though also same point of why complain about immigrant crime if the real problem is crime? Isn't the real problem with Scandinavia that you can go and murder people and get 15 years in a minimum security prison? Like, isn't that the real issue? What are the fact that you've got immigrants? Why is that what you're focusing on? Because you don't want people feeling bad about you. So.
It always, because you're right. Like, you're so right. That's what it is. It's, gosh, and it hurts because the argument sometimes just gets so muddled up, and they just layer the immigrant thing on top of it. They're like, it really is it a criminal issue or is it an immigrant issue? Is it a housing problem or is it an immigrant problem?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, like what I found is when talking about immigration, it is very normal for people who are critical of immigration just to cycle through arguments, like my dad. All right. So my dad is very anti-immigration. And if you start talking with him, the best that'll happen is he'll drop an argument and move to another one, move to another one. And then finally he just comes full circle. Right. I mean, it's a lot like if somebody doesn't like their mother-in-law, they'll have complaints about the mother-in-law. The complaints might not even be compatible with each other, but the real issue is, I just don't like her.
Yeah.
And then you pretend that the particular issues are what you're complaining about, and they're just not.
So I'm rounding up now, and thank you so much for doing this with me. I think the last question I have for you is more like advice for. So part of what I'm trying to do this year is like, how do I drive a better conversation around immigration? Because I feel like that's one of the problems. Because what has happened is the politicians now take these simplistic narratives and use that to, just basically further their agendas. And I'm just curious if you have any ideas on how can we have a better immigrant conversation with immigrants, Canadians, the US, just a better conversation. And what does that conversation even look like?
I mean, I would say that for Canada, since I know that housing is one of the main complaints, I would bring out my latest book, right? And say, look, you're complaining about immigrants, but the real complaint is housing. We solve this problem by allowing people to build a lot more housing, right? Which means deregulation. It means we need to stop looking at community activists as being wise, thoughtful, helpful people and realize they are the problem. They are hysterical, innumerate fanatics, and the less say they have, the better. So anyway, I would maybe not immediately put it that way, but yes, say, look, if the problem is housing, let's build housing. Yeah. Don't complain about immigrants if the problem is housing. We have messed up two areas of policy. We got relatively good immigration policy in Canada, really bad housing policy. Let's not make our solution to mess up both things.
Yes.
I would try that. Although, honestly, you're already doing great on one of the main things that I struggle with, which is just personality. You got a great personality, right? You've got a lot of charm. You've got a great smile. I'm never going to get a smile as good as your smile. It's just true, right? All right. So we all yes. You use that, right? There's never feel bad to use smile and charm to go and win people over. And especially realize often the best argument is not an argument. The best argument is just making friends with people. They get to know you, decide that you're a decent human being. And then in the future, when the argument comes up, then it's no longer, it's just some guy never known who disagrees with me in immigration. It's my pal, Dozy with the great laugh, Dozy with the wonderful teeth, right? All of this comes out, and then people listen to you. So I'd say that is a lot of what's going on. I'm a big fan of Dale Carnegie's classic book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, not because I'm naturally good at it, because I'm naturally bad at it. Yes. Anyway, you've got natural advantages, so I would say put a lot of effort into that because I think it will give you good payoffs.
Thank you so much. This is a good place to end this. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
I'm not smiling because Bryan said I should smile. That's not why I'm smiling. Maybe that's why I'm smiling. Maybe if the smile will make you subscribe, please subscribe. But this was so good. Like, gosh, like it was so good. And thank you for getting to this point. I appreciate it. Please subscribe. I'm smiling again. Please subscribe. Share. If you know someone who should listen to this, please send it to them. Have a beautiful day.